Kalorama, a recorded books high-bridge imprint, presents Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People by KT McFarland. Read by KT McFarland. Dedication. To my husband, Alan Roberts McFarland, the love of my life, the song to my soul, and the North Star to my purpose. Part 1. Trump. Chapter 1. Why I Joined the Trump Revolution. I was as surprised as anyone by Donald Trump's victory. As a Fox News national security analyst, I had spent the day at our studios in Midtown Manhattan, watching election commentary and occasionally providing analysis myself. I was convinced Hillary Clinton would win and, as president, take us even further along the path of economic and global decline. She might have been a less combative president than Trump, but she would have done nothing to stop the erosion of American power and increased indebtedness. She would not have taken the steps necessary to restore America to robust economic growth. As a result, she would have presided over the slow decline of American power and influence, and, in time, other countries would rise to take our place on the world stage. In the past, Clinton had picked the wrong foreign policy priorities. She had neglected the aggressive rise of China, yet pushed for interventionism abroad, especially in the Middle East and North Africa. I took no joy in being on cable news that day. I was just going through the motions, resigned to Hillary Clinton's blowout victory. But as polls started closing around the country and Trump unexpectedly won a few key counties and then some key states, the chatter in the green room at Fox changed. Was there a chance Trump might pull an upset victory? After I finished my last Fox Business News appearance, I headed to Trump's election night headquarters a few blocks away to watch the impossible first become possible and then inevitable. County after county and state after state posted unexpected wins for Trump. Someone said the Clinton campaign had just canceled their victory party caterer and the Hudson River fireworks display. Trump's upset victory was actually going to happen. I was a Trump supporter from the beginning. As a fellow New Yorker, I had followed him over the years and liked a lot of what he said, especially when it came to foreign policy. Trump had the guts to stake out contrarian positions at odds with both Republicans and Democrats. He may have expressed his views in an unconventional manner, but he had a better track record than most of the experts. I had given foreign policy advice to a number of presidential candidates over the last decade or so, but they were more or less interchangeable. None impressed me as having understood the urgent necessity of reorienting our attention away from the Middle East and toward Asia. Trump was the outlier. Finally, here was a Republican candidate who wasn't afraid to face reality, to admit the mistakes we made in foreign and economic policy, and commit to a major course correction. If he could ever manage to get elected, Trump might actually get something done, no matter how many people he offended along the way. I joined Trump's National Security Advisory Committee in the fall of 2016, after the Republican convention, and was one of the few well-known and experienced foreign policy experts to do so. I participated in prep sessions for his final debates and was impressed by his ability to cut through the details and zero in on the core of an issue almost intuitively. I'd already had several interviews with his personnel team and thought I might be offered a senior position in his administration, if he actually did win. If so, I'd be going back to my roots in government service and fulfilling the dream of a lifetime. As I stood in the middle of the VIP section of Trump's election night headquarters, I should have been over the moon with excitement and possibility. I should have been jumping for joy, but I wasn't. Instead, I felt an ominous sense that something life-altering, maybe for the better, maybe not, was about to happen to the country and to me. It was a deep feeling of foreboding that nothing would ever be quite the same again. My instincts were right, just not in the way I anticipated. By the 2016 election, it was clear America was ready for change. By nominating Trump, the Republican Party had rejected the traditional Republican establishment. By electing Trump, the country rejected the entire Washington establishment, Republican and Democrat alike. The battle lines were now drawn. On one side were the elites of both parties, who had governed America for decades and supported big government and a globalist, interventionist foreign policy. On the other side were the populace, the ordinary citizens who rarely got excited about politics, but were now mobilized in rebellion against a governing class they believed was arrogant, unresponsive, and unsuccessful. It was a revolt by the governed against the governing. The Washington elites were stunned by Trump's victory. They had always taken for granted their inherent right to govern. They had assumed the country would elect one of their own in 2016, drawing yet again from one of America's political dynasties. The irony is many of Trump's supporters were just as stunned by his victory. They identified with his political incorrectness and outsider status, but never actually thought he could beat Hillary and the Washington machine. Since the 2016 election, that divide has grown wider, increasingly rancorous, and more personally destructive. We are now living in the age of Trump, where the media is all Trump all the time. Everything in Washington, every person, politician, journalist, analyst, issue, and policy is now measured as being either pro-Trump or anti-Trump. Our political classes have locked the country into a full-scale political civil war, which shows no sign of winding down. The outrage industry has cranked the discussion up to the point where we're always on edge. You can't even talk about the weather without being put into the pro-Trump or anti-Trump camp. There are no safe, neutral zones in Washington. Pundits and politicians throw around words like populist and nationalist, elitist and globalist with wild abandon. The terms have been hijacked to sanctify or demonize people depending on which camp they're in. They're the new equivalent of four-letter words, shorthand for everything that is good about your camp and bad about the other camp. It's the pro-Trump national populists versus the anti-Trump global elitists. As loaded as these terms have become, there's no common agreement about what they actually mean. They mean one thing to the people who identify with them, and the complete opposite to the people who do not. Each side sees the other as the enemy and refuses to acknowledge they might possess any redeeming attributes, or even that they might have an opinion worth listening to. The only thing both sides have in common is that they see themselves as virtuous and true, and the people on the other side of the Great Divide as wrong, and sometimes even criminally evil. It's worth unpacking what these words mean to the people who identify with them and to the people who do not. Without definitions, we're just talking past each other, or more likely just screaming at each other. Chapter 2: Washington Elites versus American Populists. To the elites, populism means mob rule and represents the worst in American society, the uneducated, dim-witted masses who have neither the experience nor the intelligence to govern themselves. They are the people who shop at Walmart and eat at McDonald's. The elites see nationalists as the bigoted, narrow-minded, white, mostly male, supremacists who resent the rise of women, minorities, and immigrants. Barack Obama saw them as the bitter people who, quote, cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations, quote. Hillary Clinton said they belong to a, quote, basket of deplorables, unquote, characterized by, quote, racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, quote, views. They see nationalists and populists as the people who are and deserve to be life's losers. In their version of America, populists are driven by their hatreds and prejudices, and therefore morally inferior. Conservatives are either angry whites, unwilling to make way for deserving minorities, or a rapacious business class trying to perpetuate their unfair privileges in order to keep their ill-gotten spoils. The governing elites see these populist nationalists as, at best, misguided and simplistic, and at worst, dangerous and evil. The same kind of people who supported Hitler and Mussolini and their racist, nationalist agendas in the 1930s and 40s. In contrast, the elites see themselves as society's leadership class who, by education, experience, and temperament, are best suited to make decisions for the rest of us. They see themselves as upholding the American values of equality, fairness, and inclusiveness. They focus on those in our society who have been treated unfairly in the past, those who didn't have equal access to education, opportunity, civil rights, or legal redress. They believe it is the job of government to compensate people for wrongs done to them, including to their ancestors in decades past, and to make up the difference with quotas and preferential treatment today. There is a whiff of self-righteousness about them, since they're convinced the things they believe in are universal truths, shared by all civilized people and therefore beyond debate. It goes without saying that they believe that their motives are pure, and that their virtuous beliefs make them morally superior. Therefore they are, and deserve to be, the final arbiters of our society and government. When elitists look abroad, they see an interconnected world, which is moving beyond the nation-state to a global society and worldwide economy where people, information, goods, and money should move freely across borders. They are part of a post-nationalist movement that sees the world evolving toward a more peaceful and prosperous place, where we will all be governed by universal norms and international organizations. Elitists equate nationalism with xenophobia and believe pride in one's country has been the root cause of most of the wars of the last century. Their hope is that the next century will be one without trade wars, cold wars, or hot wars. It will be a world where international commerce and communication are so intertwined that they will naturally move toward a sort of utopia bound together by commonly held beliefs and governed by a global elite which rises above selfish national interests to create a more just and cleaner world. As for Trump, elitists consider him so dangerous that he must be stopped dead in his tracks. For the first 2 years of his presidency, they were convinced the Mueller investigation would charge Trump with criminal offenses, and they shared fantasies that he would be hauled out of the White House in handcuffs and end up behind bars. When the Mueller report exonerated him, congressional Democrats and the anti-Trump media doubled down. Even if there was no evidence of colluding with the Russians to steal the election, Trump must be guilty of obstructing justice, somehow or other, for something or other. There might not be enough evidence to convict him in a court of law, but they could ruin him in the political courtroom of public opinion. The Democrat-led House of Representatives would vote articles of impeachment against him and force him to stand trial in the Senate. Failing that, they could have never-ending investigations of Trump, his family, his associates, going back for decades. They would take anything he ever said or did, give it their own spin, and scream, impeachment, impeachment. They even figured if the Senate couldn't muster the 2/3 vote necessary to remove him from office, Trump would be so wounded politically that the voters would refuse to reelect him in 2020. They're convinced that Trump is just too corrupt, too belligerent, too incompetent, and too evil to be America's president. They believe they have the right and even the responsibility to do whatever it takes, including suspending the rules, stretching the truth, and breaking the bounds of tradition to hound him from office. They've convinced themselves that once he's gone, the country will come to its senses and purge itself of all things, people, and ideas that are pro-Trump. Then Washington can get back to the pre-Trump normal. The never-Trump Republicans will once again be back in charge of the Republican Party, and the Democrats will return to power and reinstate Obama's tax and spend program at home and globalist worldview abroad. The people who call themselves populists and nationalists may not always have a clear idea of what they are, but they do know what they are not. Most are neither wealthy nor powerful nor in charge. They see themselves as having been cast aside and trampled by the governing coastal elites who dominate the Democrat and Republican parties, Wall Street, Hollywood, the media, academic institutions, and especially Washington, D.C. They see themselves as the salt of the earth, patriotic, hardworking citizens, and the backbone of our nation. They love America, our culture, our history, our traditions, and believe they're the only ones upholding the traditional American values of hard work, self-reliance, personal responsibility, cohesive families, small government, balanced budgets, a strong military, and peace through strength. They pay their taxes, worship God, keep their families together, and believe in liberty and freedom. They think America is an exceptional nation, even if they're not quite sure why. They're opposed to what they see as an entitlement society, where one group is favored over another, and granted special privileges for some alleged injustice, often far in the past. They see multiculturalism as a threat to America's melting pot culture of inclusiveness and assimilation. They believe the liberal elites are snobs who look down on them as second-class citizens whose opinions don't matter and whose votes shouldn't count, and they deeply resent it. They think they've been exploited by the richest, catering to the poorest in our society, to the point where the American dream is increasingly out of reach for those in the middle. They see liberals, or the modern incarnation of progressive socialists, as irresponsible big spenders who are bankrupting the country, who are anti-law enforcement, anti-God, anti-military, and downright anti-American. Populists believe that elites advocate for the nanny state and cradle-to-grave big government, so they can be in charge of picking the winners and losers. They think elitists want to confiscate their hard-earned money and dole it out to people who, unlike them, have done nothing to deserve it. Populists see Trump as the only guy who has ever acknowledged them or stood up for their interests. In 3 years, he's improved the economy to the point where they and their neighbors all have jobs, and good ones at that. For the first time in years, they can take a family vacation and buy a new car. They're optimistic about their own and their children's future. They don't mind Trump's bluntness, political incorrectness, tweet storms, or rascally behavior. Some of them even approve of all this because Trump is saying what a lot of them think but have been too afraid to say out loud. They can't understand the Washington insiders who are trying to throttle Trump and kick him out of office. To populists, Trump has been an exceptionally good president. It's as if both groups are living in separate but parallel universes, each seeing themselves and each other in complete reverse, like a film negative where black is white and white is black, up is down, and left to right becomes right to left. There is no middle ground, no room for compromise, no ability to see the others as the others see themselves, and no willingness to see ourselves as others see us. There is little tolerance for the belief system of the other camp, or even the recognition that the people who disagree with them can still be good people, fully entitled to their own opinions. The question used to be, are you a Republican or a Democrat? But even those lines have now become jumbled. Today it's, are you a populist or an elitist? Are you a nationalist or a globalist? Are you with Trump or against him? In other words, we've evolved into a society that does everything possible to emphasize what divides us politically, yet very little to nurture what unites us or champions our common purpose. All of us, from each side of the divide, are painfully aware that we have a serious national problem, even if we blame the other side for having started it and for keeping it going. The only thing both sides agree on is that it's not their fault. As far as they're concerned, the other side landed the first punch, and they're just defending themselves. Chapter 3. Washington's Failed Economic and Foreign Policies. How did we get to this place? How did the American people, who were so united in common purpose after the September 11th attacks, get to the point where we are increasingly at each other's throats? We now self-segregate according to our political beliefs, with each group watching its own media outlets, going to its own sporting events, and following its own entertainers. There are probably many causes for our present divide: a political system that rewards the extremes in each party, the Great Recession of 2008, and a financial culture that ignored risk and subsidized speculators, a weaponized media that finds profitability in creating division, social media that provides a platform for people on the fringes to move to center stage and scream at each other anonymously, an emphasis on multiculturalism that breaks us into subgroups, and the abandonment of civic education, which once provided the glue that held us together by reminding us of our history, governance, and culture. But most of all, it's been because for nearly 20 years, we have pursued economic and foreign policies that worked well for some of our people, but failed miserably for others. It didn't matter whether the Republicans or the Democrats were in charge in Washington. The average hardworking commoners turned to Trump because they felt either ignored or ill-treated by everybody else. That's what I've observed from outside the Washington bubble. First, a little background about me. After a successful career in government and politics, I married and moved to New York in the mid-1980s to raise a large family of 5 children and stepchildren. In 2006, after a long hiatus from government and politics to go on the mommy track, I re-engaged in public life. I ran for the U.S. Senate from New York, lost, and went on to carve out a new career in media. I became a national security commentator on Fox News, wrote a regular column for their website, and created and hosted DEFCON 3, Fox's innovative web-based foreign policy program. I also hit the speaker circuit, traveling around the country and meeting with a wide range of people: security professionals, veterans, women, businessmen, advocacy groups, everyone from corporate executives to college students. By about 2010, I noticed a distinct sense of unease that rippled across all of these people. I wasn't quite sure what caused that distress, so I decided to do some informal polling of my own, using my audiences as focus groups. Whenever I gave a speech, I began my remarks with a survey of the audience. Raise your hand, I said, if you think our economy is a mess, that the economic opportunities and security you've enjoyed won't be there for your children or your grandchildren's generation. Usually about a quarter of the hands went up. Raise your hand if you think America has forfeited our leadership role in the world. If you think we're getting pushed around by Russia, China, Iran, and even pipsqueaks like North Korea. At this point, about half the people had raised a hand. Raise your hand, I continued, if you think we've lost our way as a nation. Do you sense that the values we were raised on, hard work, personal responsibility, integrity, and fair play, have been replaced by a society of entitlement and instant gratification, where people are rarely held accountable for their actions? At this point, 2/3 of the audience would have a hand in the air, some nodding in agreement. Finally, I would ask, how many of you think the mess we're in is Washington's fault? How many of you believe the insiders have rigged the system to take care of themselves, but not the rest of us? By now, everyone's hand was up, including the guy running the sound system. The results surprised me because, for the most part, I was speaking to groups of people who were successful, well-educated, and gainfully employed. Clearly, something very powerful was happening in American society. The people I saw when I traveled around the country weren't imagining things, even if they themselves were not directly affected. Many Americans had not really recovered from the Great Recession of 2008, when we went through the worst economic and financial crisis since the Great Depression. Even though the economy as a technical matter had grown modestly in the years after 2008, the working and middle classes had actually lost ground. Median household income in the United States had not just stagnated. Data from the Census Bureau noted it had fallen by more than $1,000 in inflation-adjusted dollars from 2008 to 2015. Our great middle class, which for decades had been living proof of the American dream for millions of people, was shrinking as more and more people fell out of the bottom, and fewer people were able to move up into it. The rich were getting richer, but the poor were being permanently left behind. The percentage of people in the workplace had dropped significantly since the beginning of the 21st century, and our national debt was spiraling out of control. High taxes and overregulation were suffocating economic growth, and the number of jobs open to the working and middle classes was shrinking. The Obama administration assured us that the green shoots of recovery were just starting to sprout up, even though, sadly, it would be largely a jobless recovery. Whatever gains there were in those years went mostly to the top 10%, especially to the top 1%. In many cases, the very people and corporations who caused the economic crisis of 2008 were the ones who benefited most from the solutions the government imposed. Take, for example, the big banks that triggered the crisis. Rather than do what banks are supposed to do, provide capital to companies to invest in growth, they created risky financial products to drive up bank profits and their own paychecks. When that shaky banking structure collapsed, both the Bush and Obama administrations deemed certain banks too big to fail and bailed them out. Most of the bankers running them were allowed to keep their jobs, and after a brief adjustment period went right back to doing the things that had gotten them into trouble in the first place, taking big bets with other people's money and receiving immense compensation for the gambles. If they lost their bets, no problem. They weren't made to pay for their mistakes. They walked away with big compensation packages and their retirement plans intact. It was a heads I win, tails I don't lose arrangement. And surprise, surprise, many of those people were also major donors to the Democrat and Republican politicians who wrote the rules and bailed them out. Even if the people I met with around the country were doing well themselves, they knew plenty of people in their communities who were not. They had friends, family members, or acquaintances who were gradually finding the American dream, which used to be their birthright, slipping just out of reach. People began to worry that their children might see it disappear entirely. The Washington establishment was unaware of the growing anger of the working and middle classes, or if they did recognize something was happening around the country, they were unable or unwilling to do anything about it. Instead, establishment politicians promised more and more of the same. Democrats promised more government assistance programs and pledged to tax the rich to pay for them. They refused to acknowledge America already had some of the highest taxes in the world, and that the super rich always seemed to find ways around them. The rich don't pay taxes. They pay lobbyists and members of Congress so they don't have to pay taxes. They're granted tax loopholes, subsidies, and rebates by senators and congressmen, grateful for their generous campaign contributions. Ultimately, promises to tax the rich don't result in higher taxes for the rich. They really mean more taxes for the middle class. Republicans promised more of the same, too. They would cut spending in order to cut taxes, but they never got around to eliminating expensive, lobbyist-protected government programs. Despite all the noise, our politicians, whether Republican or Democrat, never succeeded in doing more than just nibbling around the edges of our problems. The Republicans never managed to cut spending enough to be noticed, and the Democrats never managed to increase taxes enough to make any difference. Around and around they went, locked in a fantasy, always promising something new and different, but never delivering on any of it. All the while, the economy was stagnating. The rich were getting richer, and the poor were locked into permanent poverty. The working and middle classes were shrinking in size and prosperity, and our common problems of education, immigration, health care, and decaying infrastructure were never addressed. The only thing politicians did succeed in accomplishing was growing the size, scope, and cost of the administrative state. Congress and the executive branch all hired more staff at higher wages and with better health care than most of the taxpayers who were stuck paying for them. It was like a car jack that could only be ratcheted in one direction, up and up and up. To my mind, the leaders of both political parties were recycling the same stale old policies that didn't work and supporting the same people who had gotten us into this mess in the first place. By 2016, Washington had become a boomtown. President George W. Bush had expanded the national security bureaucracy after the September 11th attacks. President Obama had expanded the welfare state after the Great Recession. Both of these efforts were popular in the immediate aftermath of their respective crises, so the government responded by raising budgets and adding new programs. But they soon took on a life of their own. The programs were never scaled down after the crises passed. They became the new baseline, often with newly thought-of justifications for their perpetuation. For those inside the Washington bubble, the 21st century was business as usual. Politicians gave expensive new government programs to blocks of special interest groups in order to buy their loyalty come election time. They also voted special privileges, tax exemptions, subsidies, and waivers to industries and companies that contributed to their campaign coffers. Put simply, they were spending money we didn't have to pay for programs we didn't need in order to guarantee job security for politicians who didn't deserve it. Together, Bush and Obama added a total of 500,000 new workers to the federal bureaucracy, costing an additional $50 billion a year. That's just the number of new employees to administer the new programs. It doesn't include the hundreds of billions of dollars already in the system. It's no wonder that 4 of the 10 richest counties in the country are in the suburbs surrounding Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, the perception gap between the Washington establishment and the rest of the country was growing, gathering both in size and momentum. One of the first people to comprehend what was happening outside the Washington, New York, California bubble was Fox News powerhouse journalist Lou Dobbs. In the early years of the 21st century, Dobbs began to focus his attention on examining and explaining how the elites on Wall Street and in Washington had abandoned the people on Main Street. In 2004, when Dobbs was still at CNN, he wrote Exporting America: Why Corporate Greed is Shipping American Jobs Overseas. He examined the devastating impact on working-class Americans when corporations and government eagerly pushed to relocate manufacturing overseas for cheap labor. 2 years later, he followed with War on the Middle Class: How the Government, Big Business, and Special Interest Groups are Waging War on the American Dream and How to Fight Back. Dobbs joined Fox News in 2010, and his 2014 book, Upheaval, focused on how the governing class had betrayed the middle class and those who aspire to it. For 2 decades, Dobbs has been one of the leading voices in the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?